Gentlemen, this is the Warrant and Finance Committee meeting of the 25th of September 2017. Our agenda will be discussed in just a few seconds. In the meantime, I've had a lot of calls, other people have had a lot of calls about whether the public is invited to come to these meetings, and the answer is yes. And if they have a comment, I will assume that the rest of the committee members would have no problem with that. Mind you, we have to maintain our requirements of why we have a committee that's Warrant and Finance. And therefore, if they have a particular problem, we could certainly look into it and make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen if we thought there was something that could be improved. But as far as receiving complaints, we're not necessarily a complaint committee. And so people should not be in that mode of thought when they're asking questions. Tonight, I would appreciate asking questions about the items that we're going to discuss. So in the beginning, we have had the fortune of having Mr. Gore on our committee for many years. Mr. Gore has always had a problem that was not truly understood or recognized by most of the people in the Warrant and Finance Committee, or for that matter, in the rest of town government, with regards to terminology, the various definitions of reserve funds versus non-reserve funds, other phraseology that was thought to be able to be put into things, for example, in the school department articles on their warrants. And so we have asked Mr. Gore to solidify his thoughts and his criticisms and critique, put them down on paper, and then present them to us so that we might discuss them, and so then we will be able to send a composite of all of this discussion to the Board of Selectmen to see whether or not they wish to proceed with having the auditor come and meet with them and have us as a partner in that, or whether or not these are items that the board doesn't feel badly about and would accept without having to get outside people coming in. And so on that, I will turn the meeting, if we could, over to Mr. Gore. But before that, I'd like to remind people, if you haven't filled out your Freedom of Information, please do so. Take that little quiz that you've checked off, submit it to Ms. Rue. That is important for the fact that you ought to be aware of what our state law is as far as freedom of information, number one, and number two, we do deal with finances, and so therefore it's important that we comply. The other small thing real quickly, I'm going to pass around a paper listing who would like to be a liaison for various committees. The Board of Selectmen does this, and we do this as well. You can, if you simply don't have the time to do it, that's fine, I understand. At the group, I think Board of Selectmen is covered normally by a number of us who are on the committee here as far as being in the audience. But there are a lot of other committees in the town that we would like to sort of get a monthly up-to-date report on what they're doing, if there's anything that involves discussing them for finances and things of that sort, to let the committee know what's going on, just as an eye-opener. So I'm going to pass this around. I'll start with Ms. Shea. You can just pass it on around. And that's all the little work that I have here. Mr. Gore, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you now. We are all waiting with bated breath for your pronouncements. I know this has taken a long time, but I think it's a valid and very important set of issues that you brought up, so I'm going to shut up and let you talk.
Okay, I didn't know, first of all, that this was going to get turned over to me, but that's fine. We can pick up and move on from there. I think I would like to discuss the issues that I have in two phases tonight. As the Board of Selectmen know, and all members of Warrant and Finance know, I have prepared 4 papers. The first one entitled Origin and Establishment, Town Meeting Process and Terms. Second one's Town of Acton Reserve Funds. And the fourth one was on the fiscal year 2018 School Department Warrant Critique. Having said that, hopefully this committee has had an opportunity to review those 4 papers. And what I would like to do is ask you, because the papers largely describe the processes by which the town meeting works, whether you are in agreement with what you're reading before you, or if you have disagreements with it, and if you have disagreements with it, what they are, because this is my interpretation. There's nothing doctrinaire about this. This is the way I have understood the process for the more than 40 years in which I have participated in it. So, let's start with origin and establishment, which describes how the town meeting form of government came about and how it works. Has everybody had an opportunity to read that? And do you have any objections to?
Mr. Williams, can you pass that down to Nancy Rowan, please? Thank
To
you.
whom?
Nancy Rowan, please. Thank you.
Do I hear any
Go ahead,
objection?
it's a very small paragraph, and it's nothing
Well, it's 2 pages.
nothing controversial about it.
Okay, all right. No controversy.
You want to read?
Okay. Then moving on to the second paper, which is town meeting processes and terms. This defines a set of terms that the town meeting is in the habit of using and are commonly occur in statute and have occurred in the town meeting historically for as long as I can remember. There are things like the term appropriate, carry, encumber, raise, annual town meeting, special town meeting warrant, what a warrant article is or is supposed to be, etc. So, having sort of described that.
Has everyone had a chance to go through that? Is there any question or controversy about the definitions?
I
Okay.
guess my question is though,
Yep.
if you're gonna change, if you think you're gonna change this and want this on to be able to use these terms once we've talked to the auditor, you're gonna want a warrant. Because it's the only way you're gonna have them reuse these terms again, because it was taken off on the floor, so we put back onto the floor.
What was taken off?
Any of the wording, it had to go through the floor, it couldn't just take off and be put on because they wanted.
I don't disagree, and I'm not looking backwards, okay? I'm looking forward.
Right,
I'm
this is
talking
what
about
I'm
future
saying,
ones.
to go forward, in order to go forward, if this passes through the auditor and the board of selectmen, we're gonna have to present them with a warrant, this is how you want it worded, and this is what needs to be done at this point.
We're going to make that suggestion. Ultimately, what I would look for is this committee to make that suggestion to the board. The
We have
board's
a list
Right.
of tentative suggestions for the board, which we'll talk about after his presentation.
The board owns and will continue to own the warrant. There's nothing here that changes that. They have to own the warrant because these are the folks that are making requests to the town meeting. So they
Right.
have to be able to define that request clearly for everybody to understand. Okay? So they own it, and all we can do is suggest here.
Exactly.
Okay?
Last question on this part.
Yep.
Do you include all departments of the town in those definitions?
Absolutely.
Including the school department?
Absolutely.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
I've read through them more than once, and I'm thinking, if the description was more like the description that we find in a dictionary, more concise, shorter, instead of always saying it's understood it's understood, there's a lot of maybe excess words that we could
If there are,
eliminate.
I would be very, very happy to ask for your editing assistance. Believe me, I go over and over and over this stuff and scratch and scratch and scratch, and it's taken me a long time to get to where I am, but I hear what you're saying.
We're not at that point yet.
But, well,
I
we
think
can be, we can be. I have
I think
no,
some of it is the fact that you have lay terminology that everyone uses, and yet, as far as reserve undesignated and all of these types of adjectives onto funding have an actual state definition, even if we as lay people have perhaps not used it or abused it.
or don't understand it,
Or
don't
don't.
realize it's there. All right. Are
Is
we
that okay?
Having said that, again, I have no problem marking this up and suggesting ways in which I can clean it up, okay? Because
We're reading these out for suggestions and comments, so please,
All of
feel
it.
free to ask more.
all of these start out much lengthier than they are as they appear here and there. Okay. So we move on to reserve funds, and we have a problem. If we look over our warrants, and each of you have seen copies of out of sections of all warrants from 2008 to current, of lists of articles that are carried, some are reserved, some are not reserved, some change from one year to the next, they say reserved, then the next year it doesn't say reserved. We don't know what these things are, and obviously, if we're gonna do our job, and we expect the town meeting to do its job, it should understand what these funds are, okay? Part of the problem appears to arise from the fact that obviously the term reserve has common usage. What the town meeting commonly doesn't understand, and I frankly didn't understand until about 3 years ago, is that there is legal terminology with respect to this too, and that's why the ordinance is included in here, okay? So, and in addition to that, there's Gatsby, which is Government Accounting Services, okay? If you go to Gatsby and look at the term reserve, they have scratched it from their terminology, okay, because of this confusion. But in the process of doing that, what's happened in our audit is, if you go look at our audit, and we can go back to this, there are improperly labeled funds in the current audit for the year 2016, and we'll come back to that. That's a minor detail that can be straightened out. But they are confusing the term restricted with where we're using the term reserved, okay? So, again, there are a whole group of suggestions here to go to Warrant and Finance, and hopefully to go to the treasurer, who I think is on board with all this too, and to clarify some of these concerns and get us to a spot where we can move forward.
Question,
Yes.
is there anything about designated funds?
Be careful of your terms, Bill, okay?
Well,
We can get to these details, okay?
The word fund is agreed upon.
Right.
And the question is that everybody has a different definition for designated and non-reserved and reserved.
That's because there are numerous definitions out there.
So which one do you suggest we use and which ones do you suggest we don't use?
Wait a minute, I'm not there yet.
I'm sorry.
Okay? I think that the answer to that has to be worked out by everybody who has primary responsibility for this, that we do not have primary responsibility for this. All we are going to do
But
is...
if we're trying to make a clarification so that the town will use the same terms in the future, and everyone will have a proper definition of what that term is, I think it truly is worthy of setting that up at the time we're doing all this rest and
Okay.
sending suggestions
All right,
to the
then,
DOs.
if I may interrupt you for just a second, if
Okay.
you look back at the, you should have this somewhere in your...
Yeah,
There is a paper that I distributed to called Savings Accounts. Town of Acton Savings Accounts. Okay, it was a two-sided paper, and it is...
Page 21.
Is that it? Yeah, I think that's it, okay. That has Gatsby definitions right under the table there,
Yeah.
okay? We have definitions that are created by Gatsby, we have definitions that are created by statute, and then we have terms that are in common usage, okay, or understood, you know, just by virtue of the fact that we use them over and over again. That's where Gatsby has gone. They have taken the term reserve out and used it just generically as it is used in common language. So designated is a category, I believe, here in the Gatsby terminology. No, assigned, committed,
restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned.
Designated as used in town, okay, is everything that's not undesignated.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's assigned somewhere, okay? And then it's all a matter of where, and where can get very complicated, okay? These classifications are the
So
classifications.
the word designated really should not be used.
No, we may designate something, but let's
As a verb.
okay,
I
let's,
understand that, but should we be talking about designated funds?
when we're talking about designated funds, generically, what we're talking about are all funds that are not undesignated, Okay, we have an undesignated fund balance. Those are funds that are over here committed to nothing.
And so people who like to use the English language will say, well, what's the difference between a reserve fund and a designated fund? And that is where I think we need to be more definitive.
I don't disagree with you, okay, but you're
Well,
getting...
be definitive, we're listening.
Okay.
Speak out.
Let me ask the next question. Does anybody have a problem with this article, Town of Acton Reserve Funds?
Page 21?
Town of Acton Reserve Funds. This was the third paper that you distributed at our last meeting, where it describes some of the conflicts comparing warrants going backwards over time. This is a 4-page article.
If somebody finds it, quick, tell me.
Well, it's labeled right at the top, Town of Acton Reserve Funds, draft by Tom Gore, 6/5/17.
Okay, so 15, 16,
Page 17.
Okay.
yeah, 15, 16, 17, 18.
Yes.
Now, in fact, what's happened over time is funds have been created and called reserve in the warrant. Nancy signed the first of these I looked at, and the warrant 206 created 4 reserve funds. The problem is that they don't comply with the law, and I don't believe that it was ever your intent that they were set up as statutory reserve funds. Were you even aware of the statute? Because I wasn't. I didn't think so.
Probably not.
Okay, all right. Well, in any case, they don't comply with the law because they don't state clearly what the purpose is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So we have those funds that historically have been called reserve, but don't meet the requirements for statutory reserve. We have reserve funds that are reserved as reserve is used in common usage. And then we have what our auditors have done in the 2016 warrant. They've taken a bunch of these reserve funds, which are statutory reserve funds, and labeled them restricted funds, which they are not. But we don't need to get there right now.
In other words, a restricted fund could only be used for a specific purpose.
Correct. LRAP funds, for instance, are restricted, okay? Restricted is a Gatsby term,
Right.
okay? Not a statutory term and not one in common usage, but they are funds that the town receives from other agencies, either state or federal government level, and
Entitled
they,
funds.
right. There are a whole bunch of school restricted funds that aren't included in the list of restricted funds in the audit, and then we have a whole bunch of reserve funds that are included as restricted funds that shouldn't be there, but we don't need to go there. This is just an internal communication problem between.
Question.
Okay, go ahead.
Right now, I have under funds, I have reserved, designated, non-designated, assigned, unassigned, committed, and restricted. I want to know, if you break it down, the big thing, everything is either blank or blank, and under this one, you're going to have blank, blank, and blank, and under this one, blank, blank, and blank. You have to put it out on
I'll do a flow chart.
a flow chart or
I'll do
format or something.
a flow chart for you.
You understand
When we get there.
my problem?
Believe me, after the past several months, I understand your problem.
Okay.
And it's a problem for everybody, and that's why we're going through this. Okay, having heard no objection to the Town of Acton Reserve Funds, we'll move on to the school warrant. And a number of you have...
The definition for reserve funds now, do you have that in there? Do we have the definition?
You have the whole copy of the statute. Those are reserve funds, statutory reserve funds. The statute defines them. Yes, there are reserve funds that are established using the term reserve as used in common usage without any reference to the statute.
Non-statutory.
Non-statutory. In fact, in all the warrants I've looked at, there is no reference to the law creating these reserve accounts. Now, the problem with reserve accounts from my perspective is, once they're created, they disappear from public view. They exist in perpetuity, and they can be spent without any
Further action.
further input from the town. We have seen, a number of you have seen the emails, exchanges. Some of you haven't seen all of them, others of you have seen all of them. And we've come across these by accident where funds were spent which had no correlation to the initial intent of using these funds, okay? So that is as it is, okay? What we're trying to do is look forward and get to a point where this kind of thing doesn't happen, all right? So that the public understands, and this committee can understand
So.
what's going on.
Reserve funds, all reserve funds are permanent, and all.
No. Those funds that are used in common usage, are created using the term in common usage, okay, as reserve is used. You will note that Michelle carries year to year, okay,
Yes.
in the warrant. She also carries those which she believes are statutory reserve funds, and I will give her credit for doing that, because the school does not do that, and there's no obligation to do that. Fact is that when Michelle, I assume Michelle puts together that article, am I correct, Mr. Chairman? Usually, okay. She has been very conscientious about including all of those articles and bringing them to the town meeting, a list of all those funds, whether they're reserve, statutory reserve, or other types of reserve, or whatever they are. She's pretty conscientious about bringing them to the town meeting. The school board is not, okay? And so this is where we got into this issue, where I got into the issue with the school board a number of years ago, when they originally created their set of reserve funds now, which was basically a gimmick to move hundreds of thousands of dollars from a place where they had to get rid of it or give it back to the town for use, or they had a place to hide it.
Those were the buckets.
Those were the buckets, right, okay? But we moved on from there, okay. All right. So the final paper here is school department warrant critique. And there are a number of issues that I raised, you will recall, with the school department earlier this year. And most of them revolved around, aside from the reserve fund issue, revolved around the wording of the articles. The first set of articles uses a term called expend, and presumably this is the authorization that the selectmen required to instruct the treasurer to pay a bill, okay? That is not the term in common usage. Now, what happens is, as you go through the warrant, all of a sudden the terminology changes, okay? The term expend has no meaning to the town meeting except as in common usage, and there's a lot more involved in an appropriation than simply to spend the money, okay? There are things that certain people have to do along the way as the expenditure is made. The selectmen have responsibilities in doing that, etc. And so using the term expend and introducing it without definition, my conclusion is it has no meaning, because I don't know what it means, and everybody can have a different definition of what it means. But if we look at the definition of appropriation in here, it sets out what happens when you appropriate. Certain things have to happen. The authorization is good for the year, okay? You're not allowed to spend more than is authorized, okay? And you're also required, the selectmen are also required to make sure that an expenditure that they are authorizing is in accordance with the wording of the warrant. So those are four things there, three of which are not included in common usage of the term expend. All expend says to me is you can spend it. It doesn't say there's a cap to what you can spend. It doesn't say your authorization to spend expires at the end of a year, okay? It says only one of those four things in common usage, and that's why it's important to use the proper term.
So you are assuming now that one of the things we're going to put down on this one is that the verb to expend no longer should be used in development of articles, is that correct? And that appropriate is in fact the verb that should be used, is that what you're saying?
Yes, that is what I'm
Okay,
saying.
then you ought to say that.
I'm going to be saying it. I'm going to make that recommendation right here.
All right.
Okay?
Okay.
Recommended the board, okay. We'll come to those. That's,
Can I ask a question?
yes, please do.
In regards to the vocabulary, so are you going to put together the vocabulary so that everybody is using the same vocabulary?
Historically, everybody did, okay? I cannot do that. Only the selectmen can do that. The selectmen, again, own the warrant, and they have to own the warrant because they are the ones who are going to exercise the authority the town meeting grants. They need to tell us what authority they want, okay? That's why the selectmen own the warrant, all right? What we can do here is make recommendations. And the purpose of the recommendations is to clarify for us and for the general public what's going on.
And again, for clarification for both the BOS and the public, all of these other words that we've talked about as far as funds are concerned, some of them should not be used at all because of their confusion or lack of definition. And can you mention those words also, those adjectives? Restricted, committed, assigned, unassigned, designated, non-designated. Can you make definitions for those and say this one should not be used and it shouldn't be seen on a piece of paper? This one here should be da-da-da-da-da.
What I'm going to be doing is recommending
Yeah, we're all-
that terms be used, not,
Yes,
and
yes.
that other terms be eliminated.
That's correct.
Terms which can be confused with terms as they're
And that
defined
includes
here.
all of these things, statutory, non-statutory, designated, non-designated, assigned, unassigned, permitted, restricted, okay? And you ought to go down the list and say, this is for such and such.
I think
This
that-
one should not be used.
Vocabulary.
Let me,
Vocabulary.
I've given the vocabulary in here.
But that should be a part of this that we
Yes.
present to the selectmen if we approve it.
Absolutely.
Because one of the things that we've been troubled with, and certainly some of the things that you've been troubled with as far as wanting to vote no on things, which I'm not criticizing you for. In fact, I really, you are back in your own conscience about this. And that is, we have so many definitions for things, some of which are inaccurate, some of which are simply lay terms, and some of which are really inappropriate terms.
And a lot of terms that everybody talked to has a different definition.
Exactly, and that's why you need to...
Those terms should be eliminated.
Okay, so that's clear, that you're gonna have a list. Yes?
Let me move forward, Bill.
No, I'm not gonna let you move forward until you say, yes, you're gonna make the list.
I've made a list of the critical terms as I see it right now.
Make sure those are included.
Well, can I ask a question?
Please, Sarah.
So in this beautiful package you put together for us, where you have these words here, appropriate, carry, encumber.
Yep.
Where did you get that list of wording and those definitions? Is that
Those are
some?
mine.
So
That's the way the town meeting has used those historically, and you can go back and talk to any chairman of the Warrant and Finance Committee. And these are words used same words that are used in state statutes in a lot of cases.
Right, I'm just wondering if
No, I put.
sad to say, I've never read that little pamphlet that, this is how your town meeting works, right? I mean, I didn't know if, there was like a glossary in
No,
that, or
no,
if there was some
No.
place where it had, okay, so I was gonna
There-
say, can't we
there-
just say, let's just use the wording from this, please?
No, there isn't. There is none, okay? And purposefully there is not, because that would involve the state now imposing its will on the town meeting. The state is very careful about not doing that, okay?
The town meeting can't impose it on
The town
itself.
meeting can impose it on itself.
Yes, and that's what I'm asking you to consider doing.
Well, I can't impose it on the town meeting.
Making this list so that we can agree with it and send it to the Board of Selectmen, and they may or may not agree with it. And if they do, then we have words that we'll never use again when it comes to articles of warrants. And we'll have a definition of funds so that those will be used appropriately in the future.
That is correct.
So you have to list what should not be used as well as what should be used.
I think I've been very vocal about what shouldn't be.
You've been vocal, but you haven't been scripted about it, okay? You gotta put it on paper.
Let me
Yes, ma'am.
finish up.
One other thought, maybe a different way of looking at it. If we're trying to convince other people, whether it's a board here, or the auditors, bookkeepers, anybody, if the flow chart you were talking about had the terms on there that you prefer to use, or that we're going to recommend as a group, and as an addendum to that, there was a sheet with definitions on it, then for people that are used to throwing language around and mixing up their terms, it's like everybody's speaking English with 3 different accents, then they could refer to the handout and say, okay, this is the term, and on the back side is the definition. This
Like
is
a little
what,
thesaurus.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
this is what we're recommending
Yes.
to the Board of Selectmen, or the people of the town.
If you would like to do that, and I don't have a problem doing it,
I'm just wondering if it
give me-
simplifies the picture for people.
It might, okay, and what I would hope would be that this group then would get together and give me a list of words that they would like me to attempt to define. Wait a minute. Now, I have been, going like crazy on this. And I'll be glad to give you my interpretation of those words,
That's fine.
okay? And then we have to come back here and
That's
go
fine.
through them and see if everybody agrees. That's what I'm willing to do, okay?
That's
All right.
fine.
But let's go back to this. Any additional comment on school warrant?
Yes, I have a question. At one time, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, when I was an alternate, you said that you should have a closing sentence on many of the articles, that this would not be passed until voted approval by the voters. And the answer to that from the school board was, we take the verbiage for articles directly from the MEA manual, which I looked up at one time, and it's true, they were using the MEA manual, which is probably aimed at the 90% of the school districts that are large, consolidated, or have some other type of arrangements, and not for towns like ours where the Department of Schools is actually a department of the town government. And as long as it's not illegal, which it should not be, it's a simple sentence that basically upholds the idea of New England democracy, I would agree with you that last suffix sentence, closing sentence, could be, and this will not be considered approved until passed by the voters.
Okay. I have given you, I think I've given you all a copy of a draft of the school warrant, a preferred draft of the school warrant, which I believe to be legal. Having said that, I do not know an awful lot about school law, okay? I was a selectman for a number of years, chairman of the board of selectmen for a number of years. I understand municipal. I think in evolving and working forward with the school committee on developing a warrant that makes sense for this town. I think we can do that without using that verbiage and all that stuff, and I have a beginning of a draft in here, but I do not want to, I don't want to put together a draft, remote from working with Kim, Board of Selectmen, and other people who are going to have to be involved in this project. I don't have a problem doing it, but I'm not going to do it on my own.
Well, you're not gonna have to do anything on your own,
Okay.
because it has to go through this committee, number one. But number two, if you said, which I believe I'm quoting you correctly from 2 years ago, that you wanted something affirmation sentence at the end of this, that it wouldn't be approved until approved by the voters at the town meeting, is appropriate. It's certainly not illegal. It doesn't contramand any state law or anything else, and it is true that it won't be approved unless it's approved by the voters at a town meeting.
I don't remember saying that specifically.
I didn't dream it.
And Warren, but, okay. Neither here nor there, the fact
We talked
is.
about that at the budget hearings, like the joint budget hearings we had with the school board, so
What's
I
that?
do remember it being said.
What did I say?
That at the end of the warrant, it should say something to the effect of, that it's not binding unless voted on and approved
Oh, that's right, it's not binding. I mean, you can have put together all the warrants you want in the world, but until the town meeting votes.
Right.
then-
Surely, no, we know that.
We know that.
But,
Oh, you
On
need
your
the public
definition
to know.
sheet.
but
No,
the union might not understand that.
Okay, all right. Oh, that, I know what you're talking about. That has to do with my concern about multi-year budgets. Right, okay.
Yeah.
This is another problem that we have that is unresolved, and I'm going to address that in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Okay, in recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, we do know that for a number of years, certain municipal officers and officials have signed contracts that bind future town meetings without making the contract subject to the action of the town meeting. That's doesn't work, because town meeting, each government lasts for 1 year and 1 year only between the annual town meetings, okay? And it is not, a current town meeting cannot bind a future town meeting unless by ordinance or state statute. So either the town has to create an ordinance to do that, or it has to be done in accordance with state statute. There's no state statute that I can't find a state statute that authorizes, for instance, the school committee to sign a 3-year contract, bind 2 future town meetings to that contract, obligated to fund it. Okay, so, but these are things that we can take care of. There are solutions, there are ways to deal with this, but, okay. All right, so we have discussed, I think now, the 4 papers, and I have before me a sheet which I prepared today, and I was sent the bill, and I was hoping you'd make copies of it, but it includes, it's a list of recommended actions, and I will read through this, and if you will give me your copy back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to Ed.
okay.
And so he can see this too, as I go through this.
Let me see that for a second. It's the same one. Yeah.
Okay, it's the same one.
Which one is that?
You don't have this. I just passed this today, and I sent it to Bill. I didn't know whether he was gonna send it to anybody, but I would.
I didn't know we would get through this as quickly as we have gotten.
I'm very efficient.
That's the first time in how many years now?
Yeah.
And I can live with this.
You're efficient in a sort of elongated sense.
Yes. I wanna go home and have a glass of wine, okay? This has been a long process. Now, can I have that copy, please?
I just gave it.
Yep. Lois hasn't.
Lois, I will send you one tomorrow, Frank.
I'll send everybody one.
I'm gonna have to have some for the notes there, dear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Assuming that we have concluded that we have some issues that we have to straighten out, which was the purpose of putting before you those 4 papers I did.
Okay, you've taken all the comments and questions from everybody to heart, so that when you finish this, you'll have them all. Is that correct? Like making up a flow chart, having a page perhaps
I'm
with definitions?
relying upon Lois, because normally what I do at this stage when I'm asked for something is I call my home phone and leave myself a message, and I'm not gonna take time to do that tonight.
Do I
That's the
look
only way I'm going to remember it.
I'm serious.
Personal clerk
We
is.
have to get something definitive. We asked the Board of Selectmen to wait in terms of, at your request, because you didn't think you were ready. So
I
we
never
hope,
said that. I was ready 2 years ago, but that's neither here nor there.
Then why
I'm
didn't we have the
no.
meeting tomorrow? If you were ready 2 years ago.
Did you read the?
I said.
I said the committee was not, because it didn't understand the problem.
Most of us were here, I'm trying to use it.
All right. Okay, let's set that aside and move on. There are 3 recommendations with a lot of side recommendations involved in it. The first of these recommendations, and what I'm looking for is this committee to make these recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. We create a unified master list by title of all carried and reserved funds. And then we include in that unified master list, unified meaning we include the school and municipal, all reserve funds across all town books, because we don't have that now. Okay? We need a definition for the purpose of each of those funds or accounts, and then we need to sort reserve accounts by those which, one, are reserve accounts as understood in common usage of the term reserve, and two, are reserve accounts as defined by Title 30A, the statute that defines, which you all have a copy of in your...
So those that are just commonly used, are you insinuating, if you're not asking, that those be relabeled appropriately in accordance with 30A statute?
No.
Just leave them be.
No, because they appear in very different warrants with different titles,
Yes.
one after the other, okay?
I understand.
So we need one title, what is that fund, what's it for, okay? Is it statutory or non-statutory?
Can I?
So we're back to the
Yep.
vocabulary.
Go ahead.
Sorry, can I?
Yes.
Sarah?
I'm thinking it may be more productive to actually come up with our list of definitions and
Yes.
then review the accounts and place them under the definitions, rather than review the accounts and label them as this definition, this definition, this definition, then come up with the actual definitions we want to use and then relabel them.
Yes.
Right.
Right, wouldn't it make more sense to come up with our list of terms that we wanted to use and then review the
And
accounts
then we
once?
use them correctly.
And let me add to that, Tom, let me add to that, that if we have a fund which is designated in common language, but not under statutory, and you made a comment about it last year, which is why you voted no on something,
Which
are we asking them to please go and use the proper terms for the future, which will require a town vote to change the article, I understand that.
We're not changing the article, we're just talking about a new article.
Okay, then does this mean that the ones that are presently there with common usage will be accepted to you in the future? when you
Absolutely,
vote?
if you use the term reserve as commonly used, that's fine. All it means is that when you want to carry the article, you have to include it in the list of carried articles. It also means that you have to appropriate it in order to spend it. That requires an action of the town meeting. And that is distinct from a statutory reserve fund, which exists in perpetuity once created, okay, and can be expended from without any oversight by the town meeting. Okay? Let me address your question, Sarah.
Yeah.
Part of the problem that took me to where I am is, I don't know what these funds are for, and we don't know what these funds are for. That's why I'm saying, you tell us. Now, we may go back and get some suggestions.
Okay.
Okay.
But we have a whole bunch of funds here that have been used for one thing or another thing, and the titles have changed over the years. So I would sooner that the people who are responsible for have fiduciary responsibility for the town, at least be a part of that process. And that would start with the treasurer and the board of selectmen.
Right, and I agree, right, I think that we have to look at the accounts and find out what their actual usage is and what their legal, what they are
Right.
categorized as.
Right.
But I think until we actually decide what types of terms we're gonna use, then, we can listen all day long, but at the end of the day, we still don't know what they're gonna be categorized as unless we know what terminology we're going to put them in. Because we may say, we can probably listen and be like, okay, that's, casual usage of the word reserve, and understand what that's for, but that's not really what it really is. But until we know the words we're gonna really use, what are we classifying it under? So we're just literally gonna be like, okay, so that's the wrong term for reserve. We don't know what it really is, but we can put it in this pile over here of.
Okay, the title here, I'm not referring to the labels of the types of accounts. I'm referring to the specific names that were used. You received a summary of terms extracted from all the warrants, okay? It's called, okay, let me see here. All right, if you go back and look at these are just lists of titles, okay? Extracted from the articles. Let me find that. Carry municipal history.
The list we just passed out there, sure.
I haven't got that.
It's called Summary of Reserve.
Yeah, no, the ones, they have all of the reserve
Oh,
funds.
All I have is just the one that I copied off.
Who has that?
You got it in an email, and I couldn't send you the whole thing, but it is summary of reserve, then reserve capital statutory and carried funds 208 to 2016. Okay?
Is this what you're looking at?
Nope, it looks like this. It went out,
2020.
maybe you don't have it. But I think you do. I think I sent you
What's the name of it again, Tom?
summary of
Reserve statutory and carry funds 2008 to 2016. June 10th, 2008 warrant. And he was down all the warrants.
I think you.
I've seen it in my
I think you have it
file.
right there, Sarah, it looks like.
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, all right.
Do we have a number?
These-
No, it was something I printed out from the email.
From the emails, okay.
These are the titles that we need to have the board and the treasurer refine for us, so that they can appear in every year that's using the same, what we label them, the type of funds they are. That's the next step. Once we know what these funds are, then we can assign a type to them. But we don't want to jump ahead and assign types until we know what the purpose of the fund is. These are just labeled.
No, I understand
They're
that.
not
Yeah,
But
I
again, her
agree with
point-
what you're saying.
Her point is you have to have a definition to be able to say, this should be.
Like, we can look at them and say, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but like, we can look at them and be like, well, we know it's not this, and we know it's not this, and we
You
know
mean
it's not
type?
this. Yes, well,
Okay.
type, but we need to, in order to categorize it into what type it is.
I agree.
We need to have a category to put it into.
I agree.
And if the Board of Selectmen agree that we ought to get uniformity in this, then one of the things that could be done relatively simply is to, on all of these, to change the terminology to the correct terminology. If, in fact, only in lay terms or in misused terms.
So I think the first step in this process, going back, is to get the selectmen and the treasurer to sit down and come up with a title, not a type, title to the fund, and then a description for us, telling us what it's for. And then to define for us whether they believe it's statutory reserve, or just a reserve, or just a carry.
Okay.
Okay? Then we can take that and have a discussion about it, okay?
But in the meantime, we need to come up with our
Definitely.
definitions. I think
It's paramount.
yeah, I don't think we can do any sorting until we have that.
Oh, I agree,
Okay.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying like in the meantime, we can't say, well, you know, we're gonna be looking for, because there's a lot of accounts here and a lot of
Right.
information
And
that
it-
we'll need. So yeah, I mean, it can be happening at the same time, but I don't think it is of any use to us to review any of that information for categorizing purposes until we
Till
have definitions.
we know, yeah, and that's part of what we have done already here tonight.
And-
Because we don't need to know any, sorry, I'm just.
No, it will be up to the Board of Selectmen to decide whether or not they agree with that, and are just gonna leave the old ones as they are, without any changes, or change their name to the accurate name at the next town meeting, to change the name to a uniform nomenclature.
Let's use name to establish what the article is for, like Acton Recreation, and type to establish whether we categorize it as
That's fine.
reserve, statutory reserve.
Fine.
Restricted, boom, boom, boom.
Right, but no, I mean, no information they give us is going to influence the definitions we use. So we don't need to know what types they're giving, or what type they're classifying it as, for us to come up with definitions. They're two totally different things.
I agree, but it would be desirable if we were talking about the same kind of fund, okay? And so I would like them to tell us how they're classifying. Now, that doesn't mean, because as I read these, none of these are statutory reserve funds except for one account in the whole thing. Everything
Okay.
else is wrong, okay?
Cemetery is statutory now. has, by law, they have to have it.
Well, yes, but that's a separate issue.
No, but it's also one of the reserve funds.
Okay, that's fine, but then it needs to be established according to the law as a statutory reserve.
That was established 1,010 years ago.
No, okay, the law wasn't in place until 1987.
No, the law's been in place a long
All
time
right,
ago.
okay, well, okay. Which law are we talking about here?
Tom,
Okay.
Tom, I'm not gonna belabor it, but having a really distinct vocabulary, what is approved, what we're going to suggest to the Board of Selectmen to approve, and what we're going to select to the Board of Selectmen not to approve, that are no words, okay? Is going to be extremely important, and Sarah is right. We can't go any farther until we get this definitional set down here. And then, as I said, it's up to the Board of Selectmen, and all we're doing is trying to tell the Board of Selectmen, look, we've gone through all of this thing, and we've come up with these terms, and this is why we've come up with them. If you want to accept it, fine. If you don't, fine. If you want to accept those articles and warrants that are long since passed but are misnamed and leave them, so be it. If you want to change them to the preferred definition, definitional nomenclature, then fine, this is what it should be.
Yeah, because all we can do is work to the future, we can't go backwards at this point.
That's right. Let me proceed with this. Recommend to the Board of Selectmen, working with the audit firm to resolve conflicts arising from erroneous classification of reserve funds as restricted funds, blah, blah, blah. Recommend to the Board of Selectmen that all future town meeting warrants use the titles created in one above. Okay, those are the titles that we suggested that we come up with for those funds, consistency in other words, and recommend to the Board of Selectmen that any future warrant articles creating a reserve account, if established under Title 30A, contain a reference to the statute. In other words, this account, this fund is a reserve fund in compliance with the statute. Okay, that's one set of recommendations. Okay, that has to do with this list of carry and reserve and statutory reserve funds, and getting them straightened out so that we understand what they are and the town meeting can understand them. Recommendation number 2, the Board of Selectmen, all future town meeting warrant articles use the verbs defined on page 1 of town meeting processes and terms. It says, these are the terms we use, okay? If we're going to talk about an appropriation, we're going to talk about appropriation. If we're going to talk about raise, we use the term raise. We don't use other substitute terms, as has occurred in the past, that just create confusion or conflict.
Fine.
And then number 2, with respect to that, is delete or omit terms that may be confused with the terms as defined. In other words,
In the future?
if you see a word in a warrant that can be confused with appropriation, raise, carry, those terms that the town meeting understands, they should be deleted from the warrant. Number 3, with respect to construction of the warrants, write articles with working definitions of the article's purpose. Okay, what is a working definition? A working definition is a definition, think of Venn diagrams if everybody's on board with those. I don't know if they are or not. A working definition is a testing definition. You can either say that in other words, when you write the description of what the article is for, you should be able to say this appropriation, this appropriation, this appropriation, this appropriation clearly fall within that definition or clearly do not fall within that definition. You can't do that perfectly, okay? But for all major, okay, expenditures, that's the wording we should be using. When I drafted the school article, for instance, on the first one on what our school articles number 2 says is for general purpose education. We're going to appropriate this for general purpose education or something like that. Well, what that article really pays for is it pays for classroom instruction, primary classroom instruction, in other words, teaching staffs in primary rooms, and it pays the whole secondary tuition. That's not what this stupid article says, excuse me, but you should be able to say, okay, where's tuition in this budget? Okay, it says right here, tuition is here, that's a major expense, okay? Where are our teachers paid for? You should know that, and the selectmen need to know that because they are the ones who carry the burden of authorizing those expenditures. If it's not clear where the money's going or where it's coming from, I don't know how those guys know, be able to sign a treasurer's warrant. Okay, that's the point here, okay? And the way you test a working definition is just try it out on a few people. In other words, you take a group of 5 people who aren't communicating with each other, and you put a bunch of appropriations on the table, you say, where does this fit? Or where doesn't it fit? You know, if everybody comes to the same conclusion, you've hit it on the head. If they don't come to the same conclusion, you haven't hit it on the head, it needs more work. That's the test for it, to run it backwards, you understand what I'm saying?
And again, it can only be done,
That-
it's gonna only be done if those people doing that have the definitions in there.
So if we come up with a list of a vocabulary list, and the selectmen approve that, wouldn't that be the language that every department has to use?
Well,
Departments don't write articles.
Right.
Selectmen write
Selectmen
articles
write articles.
only,
Okay.
okay? We don't write articles.
We
We
can
can make a recommendation
recommendation.
concerning an article, but we can't just come up with an article and say, hey, Ed, I want you to push this forward. That's not what we do. It's not what we're here for.
That's like in the spring, and you guys will see, people come before us, they ask us for the money, or they tell us why they want it, and we recommend at that point whether they get it or whether they don't, and we take it to the selectmen, and it's up to them if they want to put the article forward or not.
Keep going.
okay, just so we're clear on this, I'm talking about warrant article construction. We're talking about, there are 2 critical parts to this. There's the verb. And what I'm saying or advocating is that the verbs, the action words in the article come from this list that we've defined here. Raise, appropriate, boom, boom, boom. So we don't substitute other words for it that can be confused. The other part of this is what the article is for, and that's what I was talking about, a working definition that applies to that part. I can't write that because these guys have to write it, okay, and describe what they wish the authority to appropriate for, okay? All I'm asking is, or suggesting is, that they write a definition of what the article is for that is usable in the sense that anybody can take an appropriation, or a substantial appropriation anyway, and decide where that money was spent. Okay? That's the working definition part that I'm speaking of here. Okay. One last part of this, which I haven't focused on a whole lot during this process of developing this literature, but I did raise with the school committee before, is recommend to the Board of Selectmen. They propose a set of conditions under which municipal officers and officials may be authorized to sign multi-year contracts which encumber future town meetings. Any such proposal should be approved by the town meeting. And then I list a bunch of optional ways in which you can get to that conclusion, and I'm sure there are other options too, because any problem has an infinite number of solutions.
Read out the options that you give.
Okay. Require all contracts contain provisions making them subject to the will of future encumbered town meetings. So one of the first things, when Ed joined the Board of Selectmen, one of the first tasks he got involved with was putting together an agreement with the town of Sanford on dams, and you can correct me here if I'm wrong, Ed, but and it came before Warrant and Finance at that point in time, and I looked at it very carefully, and that, that document was well done in that it contained provision making the observance of the contract contingent upon annual funding by the town meeting. Okay? That's the simplest way to do this. Have you heard the school board object to it?
I have a question about that though.
Yep.
If it's done that way, and the contracts is, if I'm not mistaken, are for 3 years each time, if the voters don't approve, say, the second year's budget, what sort of horrible consequences occur
Actually,
as far
it's happened
as
before.
school year,
If
having to notify the union 120 days before they can
Dr.
meet.
Williams, it has happened in the past where we haven't passed the school board and they have to go back and revamp it and bring it back.
But that's like 120 days they
No,
have
they
to.
didn't.
Well, and right now it is, according to what they have told
Right,
me.
they didn't take that.
Both parties have to be given 120 days
that's
preparation.
the way they've written the contract.
I know.
That doesn't mean it has to be that way.
But I mean, that's the point.
They could.
They
Yes.
can take up to it if
They
they
could.
want to, but no, they went back, the school board actually took it back back to the board, and they went back over it again, they deleted or rearranged or fixed it so it would make the approval, they went, come back, and we actually approved it the second time. The first time we did not approve it, they had to go back.
What year was that, if you don't mind my asking? Do you have any idea approximately?
Approximately, probably 5 to 6 years ago.
5 or 6 years ago, okay.
That, what I read you there was an optional way of dealing with this, and I described to you an incident where our current chairman included it in an agreement, okay? There are other ways of doing this. We can adopt an ordinance. And then we would like to know what conditions under which we can adopt an ordinance which will authorize certain officers and officials to write contracts for more than 1 year and sign contracts for more than 1 year, okay? We have to do it by ordinance, and we can do it with all kinds of conditions. For instance, we can say, you bring the contract to the town meeting, you get approved by the town meeting. That's one condition that you could impose on that. You don't have to, but it would be included in the ordinance.
Are you thinking of other people other than board of selectmen when you say municipal
Yes,
officials?
yes.
Like who?
Municipal officers as opposed to officials. The selectmen are our municipal officials. Municipal officers are currently signing contracts for 3-year terms, okay? And there is no provision to fund those contracts beyond the year in which they're funded. There is no, the term of the government is 1 year and it's done.
So is that normal that people other than the board of selectmen can sign contracts?
That's another question.
Is it normal in this state?
Most of the school systems in this state are not departments of little towns, and that makes a big difference. Right now, 78%, if I'm not mistaken, of all monies that go out in the school system each year have already been contracted through labor negotiations for a 3-year period. So that our function basically is very limited, and what we should be doing, we can bring up things that we have concerns about, which I think we did to some good degree last year. But it doesn't stop the process without saying, we'll have to turn this over to the town voters and see if they want to do this way. And I don't know that the legislature has toyed with the idea that officials of the town should be included in the negotiations between the school board and the unions. I don't know if that is back in for an agenda for the legislature for this year. Perhaps Mr. Walsh may know something more than I do.
We're talking about specifics now, so I think if we're going to envision doing something like this, then we need to go through the process of putting together an ordinance that would allow for this, provide for this. As things stand now, an officer of the town who signs a contract for 3 years is there after 1 year. If the town meeting turns it down the next year, legally, that person is individually responsible for having done that because they don't have the authority to do it. Okay? The authority can only be granted by the town meeting. So we currently have school committee members that are signing these contracts, all right? And they're leaving themselves wide open, okay? Because the town meeting can refuse. And the town meeting can always refuse to not fund anything. And then you get into one huge legal mess, which takes us back to the Indian land claim suit almost.
Yeah, we've done it before.
But Sarah is right. This is when we talked about the fact, I think that you brought it up, that sentence ought to be at the bottom of each article, that this is only approval with town meeting for each annual budget,
Which is true.
even though it's a 3-year contract with both the unions.
Well, I think we have to decide how we want to do it.
But
And
they have to decide, Board of Selectmen have to do it, but the point is that the system now has been frozen into a 3-year contract picture, and no matter what happens, if benefits go up, anything else happens and the budget is going up, we have no options right now except to ask people to please vote for it.
Or vote against it.
This year, they got the new contracts up this year too, just so you know.
Coming up.
For the school.
Coming up for this next year? Yes, this is the second year, the
Yeah.
third year is 2018, so the Board of Selectmen need to be ready, and as I said, we need to check and see. MEA is geared to the big school systems, and I'm just not sure that when they cite verse, that they're not just saying the MEA says this, but it may not be appropriate, because if they are a town department, the town still has the obligation and the right.
I think Mr. Neal is here, he has
Yes.
insight on that particular question.
Yes, indeed.
He's already addressed that question to the Department of Education. And Dick, if you don't mind speaking up, you can tell us what you were told years and years and years ago regarding this particular issue.
Mr. Neal, can you give us a quick word on that, if you don't mind, sir?
What's that about now?
The fact that the school operates independently from the town, when you inquired at the state level,
Yes.
what were you told about what the relationship between the town is and the town and the school department?
I asked the Commissioner of Education,
Yep.
and he asked me if the school was a SAD. I said, no. He said, is it a CSD? I said, no. Is it an SAU? I said, no. He said, is it a department of the town? I said, yes. He said, well, Mr. Neal, he says, as a department of the town, then the school district department has to follow all the rules as any other department, whether it's a fire department or any other department. And if you allow them to do otherwise, shame on you.
Right.
Those were the words from the Commissioner of Education.
And thank you, Dick. I have to admit that I probably have been party to letting some of this happen, and there's a little bit of history there. Back in the 90s, we probably all remember, not all of us remember, but some of us at least remember, when we had a Board of Selectmen that thought it was their job to manage school finances, and they made a concerted effort to do so. And when I became a member of the board and subsequently board chairman, I purposefully did not, enforce a lot of things that I probably should have enforced in that period of time, just to emphasize the fact that the department is a department and is independent, that it's not the board's job to manage the finances, it's the town meeting's job to manage the finances. So I will claim some responsibility for letting these things slide.
It's not just
Again,
one person,
and I did it intentionally. No, it's not just one person.
Mr.
but-
Neal, approximately when did the move start occurring where the town voters were not given real definitive saying, do you want this budget? This is a budget of the second year of negotiations and contracts. Do you wish to approve it or not wish to approve it?
I don't recall.
Has it been within the last 10 years?
I remember that I was selectman back,
When you were selectman?
29 years ago.
Didn't it take place, you guys, back when the schools and stuff were deciding where we were going, once we got done with wells and stuff, we had to go through that, where we were gonna end up, or we were gonna go to Sanford, Noble and all that, wasn't it back then?
I'm not
That
sure
all
what
that
the
took
question
place?
is. I'm not sure what the question is.
When did the move go to just depend on this, on the negotiations, on the labor negotiations, and more or less give them a free ride for 3 years.
Because didn't they change the
Teachers
law?
became a union.
Yeah, that was back up 10 years ago.
No,
Okay.
it was longer.
10 or 11, remember you were, I think you were one of the first selectmen to have to deal with
I think
it.
I was on the school board back
Yeah.
then.
Oh,
So it was quite a while ago.
2000, it was probably 1995.
I was gonna
Okay,
say,
so
yeah, it was
you-
20 years.
But there's an important crux here. Those first contracts were one-year contracts. And what's
That's
happened is
Yep.
it changed. One-year contract is fine, okay?
Yeah.
That's not a problem, that doesn't encumber future town meetings. When it changed to 3-year contracts, nobody was looking, and it was done.
I think it changed, like
That's-
she said, as the unions came in, the unions wanted larger,
They became
longer.
unionized.
Yeah, and they
yes.
wanted longer. Before that, it was year to year. There
Yeah, it was
no-
year to year, definitely.
And we were on town floor together, and there was no, it wasn't separate, it was all, you were right, there for the day,
Yes.
basically, period.
Yes.
I have had my say, it is my purpose to provide the Board of Selectmen with all material that's in this book. If they wish it, if they don't, that's fine, or they can start a fire with it.
before you start any fires, I just want to get a summary. That one of the things that you will do soon, if you possibly can put it in your schedule, is to make a definitive addition to the vocabulary words.
I would like you to make a list of the words you want to
Oh,
find.
I'll be happy
I will
to.
be glad, I have already said that.
I'll be
Make a
happy
list.
to.
And-
And then we can use, and if you want to use some sort of a formula or box designation, reserved, non-reserved, then you have 2 of those and 3 of these, and this one branches out, you can have this one or this one, and do it that way, that's fine.
That would make more sense.
Yes,
Yes.
that would make wonderful sense.
You do have to go back to when these funds were originally created, and one thing that sort of bothers me, just as you cannot encumber future town meetings, we're trying to encumber future boards of selectmen.
No, it's totally up to the Board of Selectmen what they choose to do
Well,
with this.
yes, but this is this board.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when the next, like you guys, when you all changed, it's the next one, the third one that comes in.
Well, you know what?
They can.
Since 1820, up until sometime in the early 2000s, the terms were consistent. It's just, well, I'm not gonna say what I think, okay? I did say what I thought about the school warrant here, that this was intentionally done, okay? And I have a problem with that, because it's, at best, it's confusing, and at worst, it's deceptive. And that's on paper, I've written that down, and it clearly is. I mean, you use the same term, you use a different term to accomplish presumably the same thing.
I mean, in
From article
some
to
ways,
article.
Tom, I agree with you, but how can you tell us we have, okay, on a 3-year contract, how can you tell us we have to give you the money for the 3 years? That's what I've never understood how they can do that
You can't.
before we get there. I've
You can't.
never understood it.
Right.
I mean, granted, I've listened, I've been involved in a lot of stuff I never understood. And that's it's always been one of my peeves. Not that I'm against or for, I'm gonna hear it when I get home probably, but it's just the idea, how can you promise a fund when you don't have the money to give them? And I've always had that issue. And I've had it for years. It's like, granted, they want, there's a trade teachers union, they want 3 years. How can we make that promise? And like you said, it has to be continuously. In other words, it has to be upon our meeting in June that they get this. Other than that, they shouldn't,
And mind you,
Yeah.
from one year to the next, some of the contractual arrangements are such that things go up. For example, the benefits,
Benefits,
which
especially.
has risen because they have a group contract for their insurance, has risen some 20+%.
I mean, we saw that last
Just
year when
from
we were in
one year to
school.
the next year.
And to your point about, you had mentioned the legislation excuse me, about allowing a town official into the negotiations.
Yes.
Cloture is this week, I will see if I can get any
Would you?
information as to
Oh, that would be
whether
very, very
there's a
helpful.
similar
Because the only thing I know, the term that they used on us last year when we asked, is like a member, not everybody, but like a member of Warrant and Finance and the chairperson of Selectmen. We asked and they negotiated if there's any possible way these two particular people could sit in.
Well, they would
Maybe
sit-
not say nothing, just sit there and listen to what's being said. And we were kind of told that it was a matter of good faith negotiation.
Right, this past legislative session, there was a bill put forth to allow a town official in on any negotiations between a town and,
Contractual work.
yeah, exactly.
Which I think is good.
And as far as I know, it didn't even make it out of committee.
Okay, that's what I was
I
afraid
could be wrong though.
of. It was in committee when I heard about it, Sarah, so that's
Um,
probably.
Yeah, I was following it for a little while and it kind of fell off, but like I said, cloture is this week, so I know a couple people, I'll see if there's anything similar.
If we do an ordinance enabling 3-year contracts and provide in the ordinance that those contracts need to be reviewed by other parties before they're signed, that's a perfectly legitimate way to address your issues here.
Provided that the union agrees to that stipulation.
If the union
If they don't
doesn't
agree
agree,
to
then
it, they're gonna send you back to the table.
Oh, of course they are, that's first time
Oh,
through.
yeah.
Exactly.
And all we can say is we can't guarantee the funds.
Understand that,
Right.
understand.
In closing,
In closing, I would
can I
ask,
have that paper? I'll send it to you electronically.
I would like one also.
Okay,
I think we all would, so.
thanks, appreciate it.
can I get a sense of the board's opinion on this set of recommendations? Are these a set of recommendations?
We're
that
not
the
a board, Tom, we are a committee.
A committee, are these recommendations, a set of recommendations that we should make to the selectmen?
Oh, we'll start around the room just to give, not a binding answer. Are there any outstanding questions, comments, or problems that you have with the presentation that was made tonight? Just go around as an informal. Anybody? Sarah?
Well,
Sarah?
I was just gonna say, as in regards to the recommendations, I don't even have a copy of it to read,
Right.
so I'm in no position to even say.
But what we
maybe-
talked about this evening, there's certainly nothing that's horribly.
So, no, I
ground-shaking.
think, really, I think before we can really move forward with any concrete next step, the definitions is the most important thing. So I'm just gonna, and Tom, I'm happy to work on that with you, honestly.
You got
So-
two volunteers on that one. Any
But
other comments?
there's nothing you're gonna throw this out with, huh?
I was really struck by the fact that the town treasurer understood your point so clearly and said, yes. She also, needed
Oh, I have found her to be
These
very,
things
very
needed
insightful. Very insightful.
clarification on
Yes.
many of these things.
My sense in dealing with her is that she's been nervous about a lot of the things that have happened over the past number of years, and I think that's why she's been so very, very careful about bringing these articles up, regardless of the fact that these, quote, reserved, don't have to appear in a warrant. She has put them there.
Yeah,
Okay, and that's sort of a backstop and guarantee. So
Yeah.
I think she's been very conscientious about doing that. That's
Any
my
other
sense.
general comments?
I was gonna
Yes.
say, on my end of the world, I was gonna get to is, oh gosh, I lost my clear thinking. But no, what Tom's doing is really something we should have done prior to all this. And are the selectmen actually on board with us doing this, get it to you guys, and then all of a sudden, you guys say, ah, heck, it's a circular can, because I've been down that road before.
Well, he can't speak for the rest of
No,
them.
but is it something that interests you, Ed, as you guys as a board?
Do you think this is important? Do you think this is important?
Anything's important when someone brings it up, okay? Tom's raised the idea that there's some things here that need to be cleaned up. You talked about 1820, and the other way words are spoken back then and written, up until the 2000s, a lot has changed.
Yeah.
So you do have to look at these documents, you do have to update them, like everything needs to be updated. I think this is a good thing. I think from the selectmen's side, I'm not sure 3 years behind me how things were. I know I know the last 6 years, okay? And I'm just gonna focus on the last 3.
We don't wanna focus on the last, what we wanna do is.
Right, we wanna move
No,
forward,
we wanna move
yeah.
forward.
So we wanna clean up some things, though, that might have happened in the past. I don't think from the selectmen side, there was much that was done under the table. I think any of the words that were put in there, I think were, yeah.
I don't think anybody was either.
Right, no, I'm not, yeah, I know, I'm just saying, I think some of that does need to be cleaned up. But I do agree with Sarah, the first thing that needs to happen is you folks need to give us what you're looking for.
Yes.
If you give us what you're looking for, you say, this is how it should be, how we see that it should be done, of course, we'll take it, and it will go to the treasurer.
I think that's what the Senate recommendations.
Yep, it'll then go to the attorney, and when it comes back from there, it may come back to you folks to have some tweaking done to it, but I think overall, from my side anyway, personally, as a selectman, I'm all in favor of what you're trying to do, you know, especially get it all cleaned up. The school side, I don't know a lot about the school side, so that's a whole animal in itself in a way.
Right.
Granted, it dovetails in, but, you know, that's been, you know, a different sort of animal there, so.
What I would suggest and hope is if we're gonna move forward with this, I give you guys a copy of this, you make copies and ship it down to the school department too, so that they understand what's going on.
Well, I think once again, it's coming from you folks should be the one shipping it down.
Well, okay, that's fine.
Well,
We can actually
yes.
ship down.
Yes and no. I mean, if you
Yeah.
all totally disagree with this, then we shouldn't be sending it to any other departments
Yeah,
under your aegis. It should go to you all first.
Right.
And then if you say, fine, here are a few things we'd like you to consider changing, we would do it, and then ask if we could send it to the school
Yeah,
board.
and
because-
I think the bulk of the changes in whatever you're doing may come from the school side.
Yeah.
I
as
would
opposed
agree.
to
I would
our
totally
side, so,
agree.
yeah.
Frankly, I think.
Our side, I think, is the easy side to do it.
I think what's happened here is their legal team has given them very, very bad advice, as I've made clear before,
Well, the NEA has not helped.
no.
I passed out a copy of the contract between the assessor and that is contractual with the Board of Selectmen, even though the Board of Selectmen are really also the Board of Assessors. But no town, I guess, have the selectmen actually making the assessment, but they almost all have a contract with a certified assessor. And so that's a copy of the contract. At our next meeting, we can discuss that in further detail. It's now going on an hour and a half. And Chairman Mao always said that meetings should last only 45 minutes. So,
Well, you're on Warrant and Finance, it always takes longer.
I know, but anyway, you can take that home for reading. I will work with Tom in getting this thing put together, Tom. I'm telling you.
I think it's pretty well doggone close to put together, but if you want some words to find, I'll try and
I
find.
will
And I'll
simplify
tell you
the
what my
list and go
definition.
back and forth with you. And Sarah, we will use your good services also if we need to, please. All right.
So we hit based on the liaisons, now what about, we hit forward to the assessors, and what about
The contract for the assessor is there, and we'll discuss it at the
Okay.
next meeting.
When is the next meeting?
When would you like, when we get this ready, we'll call everybody and find
Yeah,
out.
but how long are you gonna be before we get this ready? We
A
talking-
week?
A week, we
10
talking
days?
10
It's going to be longer
14
than that,
days, this is what I'm
because
saying.
I am going to be gone starting,
It's Christmas and the holidays.
annual, this is my anniversary
Auditorium.
disappearance until after Columbus Day weekend. And I will be down east, there's no telephone service, there's no TV.
Where are you
there
going?
Ain't nothing, I'm not telling.
Well, my biggest thing is that how long are you gonna be gone, Tom? Because we need to have this ready for January, because no later, because we gotta be able to go through the other side.
I'm
We
going,
gotta have the words put in place before the school starts their contract
Right,
negotiations.
and they need to be aware of what we're proposing
I mean, we
as far
just
as
can't put it
changes.
off because, I mean, we have to
When
have
will
a
you be
frame.
returning from
I will.
X place?
stop talking for a minute, I'll tell you. Secret, Columbus Day, official Columbus
That's
Day.
the
Columbus Day is the 12th.
Monday, no, it's not, it's the 9th this year, I believe.
Oh, that's right, that's
It is the
Canadian
9th.
Thanksgiving.
It's a couple of weeks.
Yes.
That day I am returning.
So
And
we'll
I'm
have,
not listening to any taped messages on my telephone.
we won't send you any. But you do have an email address and we might be sending you stuff there.
Lots of luck.
So do
Okay.
you want to plan one after he gets back, like that week of the 9th?
Yes, yes.
When do you like to plan it?
But we'll go ahead, when do you leave? Honestly?
This Saturday, maybe Friday, if I'm really lucky.
Okay, or like maybe Tuesday, tomorrow.
You keep me here much longer, it might be tonight.
Okay, fine. We'll try to get something going this week, and then even Sarah and I could work on it a little bit if we had some guidance from.
Now, do you want us to come up with any questions as far as what needs to be done?
If you do, but I got the impression that most people, number one, think this is important.
Right.
I have almost a unanimous consensus that this is important, and the question is now, how do we frame it into words and wordsmith it and have it presentable so that we can give it to the Board of Selectmen with our recommendations that hopefully will be close to unanimous, if not totally unanimous.
So we're pushing off are we actually going to meet with the assessor at this point, or are we just pushing them off?
No,
Different person.
it's
No,
the assessor,
yeah, the auditor, I'm sorry.
No.
the auditor.
Yeah.
That's gonna be up to the Board of Selectmen, but they have told us that they will wait until we give the word that we're ready.
All right.
And they will know that we're ready when we send an actual paper copy to them for perusal, okay? So
we're not meeting tomorrow?
no, the meeting was called off.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Does anybody,
I've been out of town.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
given the scenario you have described, does anybody have any problem with my continuing to supply the Board of Selectmen with copies of all this literature as presented tonight?
No, not at all.
So that they can at least be on board with it as it evolves.
Not at all.
And can participate in the discussion.
But I think this evening was.
Is that something you folks would
Good.
find useful? Sure. Then I'll give it to Jen and let her.
That's fine. Okay, if there's no
Mr.
other,
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
may I?
yes, of course.
I'd like to address Ed. Ed, if you could, in a short few words, could you please enlighten those of us that are not all here sometimes as to the purpose of the proposed meeting with the Board of Selectmen, the auditor, and Warrant and Finance?
Sure, that's easy. Tom had questions on exactly what he presented tonight, and we wanted a lot of those to be answered by the auditor. A lot of it was auditor information that they could answer. So we felt they were the best ones to bring in to answer the questions. So, and seeing, Tom said, I'm not really ready yet, but then he says he was ready, I don't care. It's, the board, as a whole, didn't feel as though you were ready. We didn't feel as though you were ready. We didn't want to waste the money on bringing the auditor in. So, I mean, you bring in the experts to handle the things, so.
When you guys get the report.
Right, yeah, I mean, there's no sense us meeting with you folks.
Exactly.
To gather information to take back to them. Give it to them directly, and that's the best way to do it, so.
Any other comments, any comments from the
That answer
audience
what
at
you
all,
want?
Mr. Neal, Ms. Hart? Or anybody else have anything?
Wise decision.
May I hear a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
I will second that.
Thank you.
Any further discussion about all in favor? Thank you all very much. The time is 19:28.
I know, we talked.
That's 7:28.